Hello everyone. Today we're going to be going through 2 Samuel chapter 19, which is one of the richest chapters in all of the Bible on restoration after failure. David must return to the throne, but before he can restore the kingdom, he must first govern his own heart. He has to move from mourning and begin his leadership role again, from his own personal grief to his public responsibility, from justice to mercy. And along the way, enemies seek forgiveness, loyal friends are going to be honored, and old misunderstandings are going to be resolved. But tribal divisions again are going to resurface. And this chapter teaches us that the hardest victories are won not on battlefields, but in relationships. We're going to go through all of this in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps you out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. Okay, so the rebellion is over, and Absalom is dead, and David's throne is now preserved, right? God has answered David's prayer by defeating the counsel of Ahithophel and preserving his covenant king, and yet David's cry over Absalom is turning the celebration into mourning. His son is dead, and the army that risked everything to save him is going to return quietly, almost ashamed actually. Joab already sharply confronted David, reminding him that if he continues grieving publicly, he may lose the loyalty of everyone who remained faithful to him. So, David has to do something quite difficult now. He needs to rebuild his nation, which is now fractured by civil war, and the chapter unfolds as a series of encounters, with each encounter revealing a different response to the returning king. Some want money, some come proving their loyalty, some want personal advantage, others are trapped by petty disputes, but together they paint a profound picture of what happens whenever the true king returns. Alright, so let's read the first 15 verses. Joab's going to rebuke David, David's going to return. Let's read it. Verse 1, It was told Joab, the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the troops. For the troops heard that day that the king is grieving for his son. The troops stole into the city that day, as soldiers steal in who are ashamed when they flee in battle. The king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, Today you have been covered with shame, the faces of all your officers who have saved your life today, and the lives of your sons and your daughters, and the lives of your wives and your concubines, for love of those who hate you, and for hatred of those who love you. You have made it clear today that commanders and officers are nothing to you, for I perceive that if Absalom were still alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. So go out at once and speak kindly to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go, not a man will stay with you this night, and this will be worse for you than any disaster that has come upon you from your youth until now. Then the king got up and took his seat in the gate. The troops were all told, See, the king is sitting in the gate, and all the troops came before the king. Verse 9, Meanwhile all the Israelites had fled to their homes. All the people were disputing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and saved us from the hand of the Philistines, but now he has fled out of the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now therefore, why do you say about bringing the king back? King David sent this message to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. Say to the elders of Judah, Why should you be the last to bring the king back to his house? The talk of all Israel has come to the king. You are my kin, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? So may God do to me and more, if you are not the commander of my army from now on, in place of Joab. Amasa swayed the hearts of all the people of Judah as one, and they sent word to the king, Return both you and all your servants. So the king came back to the Jordan and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to bring him over the Jordan. Okay, I want to go through the first part where Joab rebukes David so severely. And the reason why is because, we see that David has shamed those who saved his life. The soldiers returned from battle like defeated men, not because they lost, but because their king mourned the enemy, even though it's harsh, right? Because the enemy is really David's son. But they are upset because he's rejoicing over someone who, his son, an enemy, rather than rejoicing over the ones who remain faithful. But if you are consumed by grief continually, Israel itself may collapse again. So this is a very recurring theme in the Bible, that godly leaders must continually balance their compassion with their responsibilities. And David, remarkably, he listens, he rises, he sits at the gate, the people gather around him, and the simple action actually restores confidence throughout the nation. And from verses 9 to 15, we saw that the king returns, right? Israel begins discussing David's return, but what's striking about this part is one of David's most surprising decisions come here, because he promises military leadership to Amasa, the one who commanded Absalom's army. So it's quite astonishing, because rather than crushing his former enemies, David seeks reconciliation. And of course, this decision is going to create later complications, but the impulse reflects his mercy, his impulse for mercy. His desire is not endless retaliation, but healing, restoration, reconciliation, which anticipates Christ, who welcomes former enemies into his kingdom. Okay, now let's read verses 16 to 30. We're going to see 3 encounters and 3 hearts in this section, so I want you to pay attention to who we're going to meet. Verse 16, Shimei, son of Gera, a Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried to come down with the people of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 people from Benjamin, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, with his 15 sons, and his 20 servants, rushed down to the Jordan ahead of the king, while the crossing was taking place, to bring over the king's household and to do his pleasure. Shimei, son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan, and said to the king, May my lord not hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king not bear it in mind, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore see, I have come this day, the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, answered, Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? But David said, What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should today become an adversary to me? Shall anyone be put to death in Israel this day? For do I not know that I am this day king over Israel? The king said to Shimei, You shall not die. And the king gave him his oath. Verse 24, Mephibosheth, the grandson of Saul, came down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet, or trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he came back in safety. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? He answered, My lord, O king, my servant deceived me, for your servant said to him, Saddle a donkey for me, so that I may ride on it and go with the king, for your servant is lame. He has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like the angel of God. Do therefore what seems good to you. For all my father's house were doomed to death before my lord the king, but you set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right have I, then, to appeal to the king? The king said to him, Why speak any more of your affairs? I have decided, you and Ziba shall divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, Let him take it all, since my lord the king has arrived home safely. A bit of a gospel presentation right at the end there, the fact that he is a sinner and yet he's allowed to sit at the table of the king. That's very, very important. Anyway, let's take a look. Shimei rushes. The man who cursed David during his flight now runs to meet him. He falls before the king and says, I have sinned. So, again, one of the clearest pictures of approaching a returning king. But what do we see? Shimei doesn't offer any excuses or blame or justifies what he's done. He just confesses what has happened. And Abishai immediately demands execution. He says, hang on a minute, this guy literally cursed David during his flight. And instead, David grants mercy because this day marks restoration and the end of bloodshed. So that's the first thing. Is Shimei being genuine? Well, we don't know yet, right? Later events maybe suggest something else, but in this particular case, the ambiguity teaches something important, that human beings cannot perfectly discern another person's repentance, and in fact, we must leave ultimate judgment to God. Mercy does not require us to be omniscient, it requires us to be humble. Only God knows every heart completely. And with Mephibosheth, we see something quite interesting. Back in chapter 16, we saw that Mephibosheth stayed behind, hoping to regain Saul's kingdom. Now, Mephibosheth appears and tells a different story, right? His appearance, anyway, tells a different story, because he's neglected his feet, he hasn't trimmed his beard, he hasn't washed his clothes. So these are signs of prolonged mourning, and he explains that Ziba deceived him. Because of his disability, he depended on Ziba, and instead Ziba abandoned him and slandered him. And now David faces a pretty difficult situation, right? He has to verify the truth, but rather than reopening his conflict, David divides the land between them, and many debate whether or not David actually judged perfectly in this case. Perhaps he didn't. Yet Mephibosheth's response is, "Let him take it all, since my lord the king has come home safely." One of the most beautiful statements in 2 Samuel, because Mephibosheth values the king more than the inheritance. His joy is not the land, it's the king's return. That echoes the gospel. Okay, let's read the final part of the chapter, verses 31 to 43, and we're going to see faithful love and divided hearts. Verse 31, Now Barzillai, the Gileadite, had come down from Rogelim. He went on with the king to the Jordan to escort him over the Jordan. Barzillai was a very aged man, 80 years old. He had provided the king with food, and while he stayed at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, "Come over with me, and I will provide for you in Jerusalem at my side." But Barzillai said to the king, "How many years have I still to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? Today I am 80 years old. Can I discern what is pleasant and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats or what he drinks? Can I still listen to the voice of singing men and singing women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant will go a little way over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king recompense me with such a reward? Please let your servant return, so that I may die in my own town, near the graves of my father and my mother. But here is your servant Chimham. Let him go over with my lord the king, and do for him whatever seems good to you." The king answered, "Chimham shall go over with me, and I will do for him whatever seems good to you. And all that you desire of me I will do for you." Then all the people crossed over the Jordan, and the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his own home. The king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him. All the people of Judah and also half the people of Israel brought the king on his way. Then all the people of Israel came to the king and said to him, "Why have our kindred, the people of Judah, stolen you away and brought the king and his household over the Jordan and all David's men with him?" All the people of Judah answered the people of Israel, "Because the king is near of kin to us. Why then are you angry over this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has he given us any gift?" But the people of Israel answered the people of Judah, "We have 10 shares in the king, and in David also we have more than you. Why then did you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of bringing back our king?" But the words of the people of Judah were fiercer than the words of the people of Israel. Okay, I want to explain the deepest lesson of this chapter, because I think it's most important that we have a global picture of what is going on. In 2 Samuel chapter 19, we see that restorations can sometimes be more difficult than victory. Winning battles can happen instantly. It could happen even in a day. But healing relationships requires years. David must receive correction, extend mercy, rebuild trust. He must reconcile himself to his enemies. He must honor his friends. He must navigate misunderstandings, and he must be the shepherd to a divided nation. And the returning king in this case doesn't reclaim a throne, he restores a broken people. Alright, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. Alright, so this chapter overflows with pictures of Jesus Christ, because David returns to Jerusalem after being rejected, and Jesus will return as the rejected king who is ultimately received. Shimei comes to him first, saying, I have sinned. He confesses. And every repentant sinner approaches Christ in the same way, not with any form of excuse or pride or arrogance, but with confession. David extends mercy. Jesus extends an even greater mercy. Mephibosheth's words may be the chapter's clearest glimpse of the gospel. He says, in essence, I don't care about the inheritance. I care that the king has returned. That is the Christian joy. That is the gospel. It's not just forgiveness, not just heaven. It's fellowship with Christ himself. And there's a profound contrast as well, because David struggles to judge between Ziba and Mephibosheth because he lacks perfect knowledge, but Jesus never faces that limitation. He knows every motive, every wound, every hidden act of faithfulness, and every deception. His judgments are perfectly clear because his knowledge is perfect. And we read in Galatians chapter 3 verse 28 that there is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, nor there is male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. The point here is that there is no longer a dividing wall between factions. All are one in Christ Jesus. Alright, so how can we apply this chapter in our everyday life? The first thing I wanted to point out is that we need to treasure something, and we should treasure the king above his gifts. Like Mephibosheth, we need to learn to first rejoice in the presence of Christ the King rather than merely in the blessings he gives you, the land in the case of Mephibosheth, but in our cases, the blessings, the accolades, the success, the material possessions. We need to have the deepest joy of our life being Christ himself. Alright, so we saw in this episode that humility receives correction and responds with obedience. The greatest joy of God's kingdom is the presence of the King himself, and that the returning David foreshadows Christ, who restores his people through mercy and truth. In 2 Samuel chapter 20, just as the kingdom seems secure again, we're going to see another rebellion erupting. A man named Sheba is going to blow the trumpet and declare that we have no portion in David. We're going to go through that, though, tomorrow. That's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps you out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.